Hello, got a product today from BetaFPV, who sent me a t-shirt, and if you send me a t-shirt I will wear it, although cheeky buggers sent me a 2XL, a little bit on the baggy side. I'm normally a medium to large, but there you go. The camera adds £10 and all that stuff. So what have we got today? And it was quite interesting because I did ask them about it when they were saying, were you interested in reviewing? It is this, it is the BetaFPV Meteor, which is a little analog Whoop. And in the box you get this little USB charger, you get one of their little 550 batteries, some spare bits, USB, and this little Whoop with another battery in it, which is a pretty nice looking Whoop. And I said to them, the perception I'm getting is not many people are going analog these days, and they said to me it was their most popular quad. So I thought, oh, people really are doing it, and I'm figuring new people are doing it. So I'm going to approach this as if you're coming into the hobby, you might want to look at this as a new thing, and so we'll talk about why you might want to do that and the sort of benefits it might have for new pilots. I should mention they sent me a bunch of other things. You can get the frame in various other colours, so maybe I'll swap that out at some point. They sent me some little decals that you can put on it, and if you're going to get this, very much recommended, a box of extra 4 batteries, and with 6 batteries under your belt you'll be able to go out and have a good blast around for a good half an hour to an hour, depending how many times you crash and lose it, before you have to come back and recharge. So that's the kit. Let's go into close-up and take a few more looks and think about what we're going to pair this stuff up with. So here's the quad in close-up. Not much to say about it. It's pretty simple, it's pretty straightforward, all in one board, some motors, USB there to connect to BetaFlight, and there's your BT 2.0 or 3.0 connector. Should be a pretty robust little quad. Now, what I want to talk about is, if you're beginning, a lot of people get like wound up with, well, what radio system do I need? These days, it is essentially Express LRS, and that is all you should need. It was a while back that it was a little bit complicated. I was making videos about it because I thought it was a bit complicated back in the day. These days, it's very, very simple. If you can pretty much just go in on the Wi-Fi network and set your passcode, and that is all you have to do. There's no flashing needed on most occasions. So to go with this quad, I would absolutely get the ELRS version, and I would partner it with something like the Radio Master Pocket. Now, I'm sure BetaFPV would like me to mention their radio. They do have one that's similar to this, but it's a bit quirky looking, a tiny screen, and it's more expensive than this one. So the Radio Master Pocket is a proper, decent Express LRS radio. It doesn't have dumbed down features. It will grow with you. It will last you a long time. I enjoy flying with this, and it's very, very portable. Good radio. Goggles wise, whatever you can get your hands on. Now, I'm going to be flying with my HD0 goggles because, you know, I can. When you're starting out, look for something cheap. I know BetaFPV do their own things. Here's a pair of goggles that came with the little SNT cars. The important thing I think about goggles, whether they're cheap or expensive, try and get something with a built-in DVR. Very important to be able to record your flights. If you ever get in a situation where it goes down, having a look at your DVR and seeing the sort of last things that happened is very, very useful to you. So the box goggles type things like these with the big lens in are generally pretty cheap, pretty nice starter pack. Just make sure it's not one of these tiny little slit holes there. Decent padding for your face. If you can try them out, if you can borrow friends, that is the best way forward for you. So I'll talk more about the pros and cons of something like this once we get flying it. So yeah, let's get flying. So off we go for my indoor flight. I've gone into BetaFlight, I've done some little tweaks to my liking and arranged my OSD as I like it. I'm not going to go into a great deal on that because, you know, this video would be very long. The other thing I didn't do was change the camera angle. There are some bits and pieces in the bag so you can change the camera and sort of have it in this little enclosure on different angles. For me, I just thought I'm going to take this outside, so I just keep it this relatively, I'd say neutralish. By what I mean by that, it's about 20 degrees, I think, the camera angle. So it's possibly a little bit high if you're going to fly indoors for the first time, but it's okay if you're sort of reasonably happy. What I did with this one as well is I set a throttle limit of 60% for doing indoor flying. I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. But whilst this was going along, and you can watch me fly around at home and think about how the video looks, and this hasn't got rapid fire mode on, so this is more what you would see on some, you know, regular sort of box goggles. It hasn't got anything special trying to make a rearrange the frame from two different sources. It's kind of, it will show you the interference as it is on a sort of a low cost pair of goggles. Back in the day, 4 or 5 years ago, I would have probably said, don't buy a Whoop as your first quad, buy a 5-inch. And the reason I would have said that is because the 5-inch quad has a lot of variety of cheap and easily accessible parts. They're very simple to work on if you smash them up. You've got lots of choices. They're not particularly fiddly. Whereas a Whoop, it's kind of, you know, built around a single board. So if you break something, it can be a bit more fiddly to fix. It's not easy to swap parts out with different parts because they're a little bit more sort of proprietary, if you like, to the individual manufacturer. It's not to say you can't swap out cameras and that. It might just be a bit more fiddly. And so I would have said, you know, go with 5-inch, don't worry about the Whoops. But that was 4 or 5 years ago. These days, I think the number one thing that's really hard to find is a place you can easily go and fly a 5-inch without people or other things having or taking a point of view about you being there. This is what I'm finding anyway. I'm very lucky to have like a whole farm I can fly on, but it's still like, you know, a 40-minute journey in the car. It's not something I can just like, oh, I'm going to fly this morning and go out and do it. I have to think about it. But with a Whoop, you can fly it in the house. You can take it to places where, you know, it's not loud and annoying, so people don't get, you know, too irate with you. You can also take it to places where you couldn't fly a 5-inch quad, which is much too tight. And so I think it's a pretty good beginner idea. And of course, it's cheaper than buying a 5-inch. In terms of breaking it, if you did break it, they can still be a bit fiddly to repair. But one of the things they do is they don't break very easily. They have plastic guards around them that stops them, you know, just crashing if you bump into anything. I'm showing you plenty of bumping into stuff. And because of their kinetic energy, when they're going even full speed, if they have a crash, it's quite hard to break them. Like, that's me bashing into stuff, as you can see here. So that is a good idea. And of course, what I didn't have when I was starting out in 2012 is the sims to work on. These days, there's sims all over the place. I've even got my own sim. There's sims everywhere. So you should get your radio, understand how to fly in a sim, and then you'll have a much easier time in translating that into an actual quad flight. Now, as far as quad flying goes indoors, I still use angle mode indoors. I've been kind of like, oh, only use acro, always use acro in all circumstances. Indoors, though, in very tight spaces, I have to admit that angle is a lot easier. This is because I find it very easy to overcorrect. It's kind of lazy. I could fly in acro if I dumbed my rates down a little bit so acro wasn't quite as reactive. I fly in like 1,000 degrees a second, and I find it very difficult to fly if I don't have that same rate in all circumstances, because everything I do, I expect a certain timing these days, and I want to know that all quads are going to feel exactly the same. But yeah, flying angle in the house, I'm not against. Outside, I would always say get into acro, understand how to use acro, get your rates dialed in correctly so you can use acro without it running away with you. And I also wanted to show this because you'll see one of these batteries flying indoors lasts for 5 whole minutes, which I think is pretty impressive. And I still had a little bit more to go. Anyway, let's try some outdoor stuff. Okay, so we're outside, so I'm going to change my rate profile to outside, which is 100% throttle range, so there's no changes to make it fly a little bit gentler. One of the reasons I actually enjoy flying little quads like this is to take it into places where it's just a little bit too dense and small to fly a 5-inch. and these things can just go anywhere. They can get away with anything. I actually thought I had a person running towards me at that point down the woods, but he seemed to have taken a different line, so that's okay. And in my first flights here, I always just feel these out to make sure it's okay. Now, if you were a beginner, although there'd be lots of potentially places like this to you, this is not where I would say take your first outside flight, because there's a little bit of getting used to things when flying in a place like this. You have to sort of get your idea about where you are and how you get back to yourself sorted, and that's a little bit by using your ears and a little bit by just knowing the area. If this is the only space you've got, absolutely use it, but have a spotter, because if these things go down, they can be quite hard to find. The beeper's not very powerful. You can find it hopefully with your goggles by using the signal there, but if you've got someone to say, yeah, it went down just over there, that would make things a lot easier. So it's kind of stick to the path, and then when you get more confident, start going off the track and sort of using the trees, because if you don't know where it is, lots of trees look the same, grass all looks the same, and these things can get buried very easily. Ideally, what you should be looking for your first outdoor flight with something like this is a large open area, hopefully still with a spotter. And although it's a little bit dull flying in a field with a small quad, because it will feel a little bit slow, it will allow you to do things like try out flipping and rolling at a height, understand how you can dive down and recover, and if you're going to crash, how that's going to happen and how to recover things. It's just a safer environment. Things like this where you've got a lot of overgrown stuff is just a little bit more dodgier, but it is quite exciting. When you get down low, start moving amongst trees, it's a lot more fun. So it is very much a great thing to do with these little quads. I love it. I'll skip over here to battery number 3, because at this point I started putting the throttle down a bit, although you can see it's only just over 50%. I needed a higher camera angle really to do more speed. This is it. It comes as kind of neutral, which is maybe a little bit high for in the house and maybe a little bit low for outside, but it's kind of a decent starting point to get used to what you're doing. And again, when you're flying around proximity stuff, you can make things feel pretty quick and pretty fun. I certainly had fun with it. You might notice that these batteries are going down a little bit quickly. Outside, I was getting about 3 minutes, which is kind of expected because I was using a lot more throttle than inside. But when I got home, I did discover I was using my old pile of 550 batteries, not the new one. So I might have got slightly more by using the newer batteries, but I think that's reasonable, looking at about 3, maybe 4 minutes outside if you're using a lot more throttle than you would be inside, especially if you're using a throttle limiter like I was doing inside. But yeah, good fun, really enjoyed it, and I flew it right over my head and it barely makes a noise. It's so discreet as far as quads go, at least, and that's what makes it just fun to fly anywhere, and people don't get too upset about these tiny things. I did take it to another place outside, and this would normally be where I'd do a bit of a range test because it's about 400 metres long, and I was pretty happy it would do it. But what we've had here is we've had actual sun as well as a lot of rain, and everything has become absolutely overgrown. So there is a big bush directly where I would fly along, and that's really going to block my signal. So I decided I couldn't really do a range test, so I kind of used it as more of a let's fly and sort of dive the tree type thing, which I often like doing. It's also useful on this one as it let me check out if we had any yaw wobble as you did a dive. Often you find with these whoops where they've got the little guards is that if you go into a dive and a sort of vertical dive and then you pull directly out by putting the throttle up, you'll find the yaw will sort of yaw left or right to a certain extent. And this did it, although it wasn't too bad. If I go into a big dive and I pull out, I felt like a little bit of yaw going to the side, but not an outrageous amount. Also, with a quad this small which has got ducks, they're often caught very easily by the wind, and one of the reasons I like to go up quite high is to see what effect this had. Not a particularly windy day, but this thing certainly coped okay. It's again, if it's really, really windy, you wouldn't want to fly it out in sort of open ground where you're going to get taken out. By flying under here, I get a certain amount of protection from the wind, which trees are quite helpful for. You see me just have a big old crash there because apparently there wasn't a gap under that branch like I thought there was. And I've crashed this a whole bunch of times. I did several flights indoors checking out a new radio with a screen, a review of which will be coming up later, and I found that quite hard work, and I smashed into a lot of stuff, and I smashed into a few things outside, and I had 0 damage. I didn't even have a nick out of the props, and that is mostly about how light these are. Even when you're going full speed and you crash into something, this kinetic energy is really quite low, so you can't really smash it up. So yeah, a nice little day flying outside before the weather came down and messed everything up for me. Well, there you go. That was the BetaFPV Meteor, and I had great fun with it. If you're starting out and you want to get into the hobby in a cheap way, this is a very good idea. I would get this. I would get yourself a cheap pair of box goggles, the Radio Master pocket radio as I mentioned, and do yourself a favour and buy the extra little box of batteries, and that gives you 6 of these to be going on with, which will get you quite a long way. Now, some would say that analog is not the way to go and you should go digital, and I have in fact reviewed the digital version of this. This is this one, and this is powered by Walks now, and you can see the video if you click on this one, which is an excellent quad. The reason I don't mention it as a stray away thing is because although the quad's not outrageously more expensive than the analog version, the goggles are a lot more expensive, so you really have to commit to something there. However, if you're the sort of person that says, actually I want to spend a lot and I don't want to buy something twice, then sure, go ahead and get the Walks Now version because the picture is much clearer and you'll have a great time. If you want to test the waters in FPV, if you're not sure, if you want to do things and start out slowly, this is where you'd be getting the analog one, and you can go pretty cheap on the goggles. But yeah, treat yourself something decent in the radio like the Radio Master Pocket. I think that's a very good one. Anyway, I hope that review's been helpful, and if there's anybody that wants me to do any more beginnery things in specific areas, you can just let me know. Thanks to BetaFPV for supplying this and the t-shirt, which I'm not wearing today. And there'll be links in the description so you can check out things in a bit more detail and if you want one. And I'll catch you next video. Bye for now. Well, you've made it to the end of the video, so thanks once again for watching. If you like what you saw, then please consider subscribing, and if you really like what you saw, then be sure to check out the link to my blog for a variety of ways in which you can help support this channel.